Great Wednesday. Welcome to the Fully Human Connections podcast. I'm your host, King. I'm joined by my co-host, Reggie. How you doing today, Reggie?
Doing well, King. It's good to be back live with you on a Wednesday morning. That's why I always look forward to this. And I'm showing up with a spiritual energy before you even ask me, I'll tell you, of 10, which I didn't really have to make a conscious effort to choose this morning. I was fortunate that it was there.
Excellent, excellent. Well, I joined you in being a 10 as well. And, I had to choose. It had some technical challenges today. And it definitely could have easily made me feel less than a 10, but I'm going to choose a 10 nonetheless because I still woke up and I'm going to go into my gratitude moment of feeling alive, sound mind, sound body, no pains, no aches, ability to see, hear, walk, talk, stand, breathe. Also, just happy to be and grateful to be able to be here and be present, even though the technology struggles happen, they're resolved for the most part. And I'm also grateful for, again, being able to be here on this session with you. It's been 2 weeks since you and I have had a session, so great to be back in the seat. A lot of things have happened in the news, so looking forward to discuss our perspective. And just really, finally, I ended with just grateful to be, again, on the path of being fully human. Because I really believe that if I wasn't on the path to be fully human, with all the craziness and insanity and stupidity going on in the world right now, I would be a sheep following suit and all that insanity and stupidity.
Yeah.
So what's your gratitude moment this morning?
Yeah, so following up with that, thank you as always for asking that. I have my standard basics of being grateful for indoor plumbing, ample, available, safe drinking water, a refrigerator with food in it, and several markets relatively nearby where I can get more food when and if I want to. So it's basic, my basic needs are met, and I never take any of that for granted. On a larger scale, I'm grateful to be, in relatively good health. I'll have a birthday at the end of this month. I know most of our viewers think that I'm probably 48 or 49. I'm turning 71, and I'm just grateful for, as I said, relatively good health. And even the reason we missed last week was because, to use a kind of a cliche, I had a real pain in the neck where I was having problems with my neck, and especially turning to my right. So eventually, I finally went to a physical therapist, and he's been working with me for a few weeks now, and it's getting better. It's not 100% yet, but going to the right place at the right time. Again, something I'm grateful for, that there's a specialist out there who knows physiology really well and how to work with it without medications or anything in order to alleviate some symptoms. So, I'm gradually having less and less of a pain in the neck, literally. So I'm grateful for all of that.
Well, excellent. I pray that all goes well for you and with you. And like I said, as I get older, I just definitely appreciate having folks to talk to that have sound mind and critical thought more so now than ever before. So with that, why don't you walk us into our topic for today?
Yeah, so the large scale, as we've been doing for coming up on 3 years now, we're speaking about the foundational elements of my 2022 book, Healing America's Narratives, the Feminine, the Masculine, and Our Collective National Shadow. And in the last several months, we've been turning slightly, still with the theme of that book, but looking at how we can be better in conversation, especially with people with whom we disagree. And that was a 2020 book entitled Enough with the Talking Points, Doing More Good Than Harm in Conversation. And even just to drill down a little bit more specifically now, going from Healing America's Narratives as the overarching theme doing a better job in conversation to now taking a look at how different groups are looking at and in conversation with what's currently going on in the United States under the Trump administration since January 20th with the, I won't try to say this in a neutral way because it's not neutral, but with the ongoing lies, with the deportation of people who are in the country illegally, with the dismantling of the federal infrastructure, the institutions that virtually every American relies on, maybe except for the uber rich, and how folks of different skin pigmentations, of different genders, of different gender orientations, and different ethnicities might experience this dismantling and these deportations, and basically, departing from the rule of law, which is a imperfectly manifested but fundamental aspect of any democracy. In the absence of a rule of law, then people can just do whatever they want, and disagreements will be basically negotiated through gunfire, knife fire, or fist fire. And that's as it was in the early days of this country and before. So more specifically, it's something we began with 2 weeks ago. We're going to continue with today. What does the experience of being a Black male in America add to this conversation about what's happening in the country since January 20th? So that's not the shortest possible version I could have given, but the overarching theme of what we're looking at today. And for those of you who might be listening to this and not looking at it, King is an African American and I'm an Italian American. So we have different skin pigmentations, and we had different experiences growing up in different parts of the country. And while we are generally attuned and in alignment on many things, our experiences and our specific viewpoints aren't necessarily exactly the same. So I'm going to be quiet now and let you jump in.
All right. Well, thank you, Reggie. And again, thank you for choosing such a wonderful topic, timely topic as well. And just a clarification, I'm one of those Black people who chooses to be Black, not African American.
Mm-hmm.
And for several reasons, but one, I'm going to use a quote from James Baldwin. To be African American means to be African with no memory, but an American with no rights.
Okay.
So that's kind of my take on it. Not knowing much about Africa as far as being raised and knowledge and history, and then looking at what's going on. And this is really a case in point on this as well. Just saw recently that Trump has created an executive order to let white South Africans come into the country and bypass all the refugee laws and policies and other people that was waiting. So they by definition could be African Americans now that they're in the country. So I don't think there's a clear distinction or delineation of describing my particular race. That's my opinion. Then I also want to state that this conversation is really coming from my perspective. I don't claim to speak for all Black people at all, just from mine and my limited research or talking to people in my circle of influence, whether they're friends, family, even people online, and do my own research and listen to folks who post videos who happen to be the Black persuasion and post videos and comments and listen to their videos. So this is what I'm using to form my opinion about today's topic, just to be clear on that. So now with that being said, I wanted to have this topic because I believe it's important to really look at having this discussion. We talk about losing democracy. Democracy is coming to an end, and we see definitely a change in how this country is operating. And we definitely see a change coming from how this country handles how the systems that were designed are being tested, and just seeing who actually is above the law. So my take initially is the fact that I don't feel as a black man that we have ever had democracy in this country. We've had kind of, I would say, we've had democracy ish type of treatment, but never full democracy where we really felt integrated into American society and protected by Americans' rights. Um, your book, Healing America's Narratives, you lay out examples of what happened in between with slavery, Jim Crow. You know, we can even go beyond that for folks who may be listening. Say, okay, well that's history. That's history. What are you talking about now? You have democracy now. And my question would be for folks who believe that and think that, at what point would you say democracy was extended to Black Americans? What generation? What president? What year? Because I can challenge that. We've all had incidents, even under Obama's administration, where it was clear democracy wasn't afforded to us equally as it was or has been to white Americans. And then you study the history of America, and you really know, again, race is a construct. We know that. But it's a construct that has been at the root in the DNA of this country. If you study Irish history, Catholic history, as you say, Italians, Jews, you learn that most were not considered white at the beginning of this country either. So they had to be kind of assimilated into white culture and then given white status throughout the years. But that's the thing. That's what really makes America unique and different from any place, I believe, on the planet that I've been, studied, and researched. Other places have racial issues, but America's race is clearly delineated black and white. We don't get into the different shades and colors of skins. Either you're white or you're black. And it and that's where you see so many immigrants now, particularly what I believe, look at a lot of uh, folks of Hispanic. You look at people like um, the gentleman from the Proud Boys, I'm forgetting his name right now, and Fuentes. They both are Hispanic men, but are leaning towards wanting to be accepted to be white. They're moving to try to say, well, we're white too, so include us in that. I think they're going to learn the hard way that they can be used as a tool for right now until everyone else who doesn't look like them is excluded, then they're going to be the targets. So I don't really believe that the real Klan, the real neo-Nazis is going to welcome them in. So they can be conservative as much as they want and lean toward the right, but they'll never be accepting those groups. So let me wrap up my initial by saying that looking at history and looking at the present, even recently, we just saw, again, man Garcia being from Maryland being deported. And we all know that's a crime, that's a travesty. But by, again, being black, being growing up from Terry Nichols to George Floyd to um, Rodney King, we've seen elements constantly of police brutality, of the system beating down black people with no form of democracy to protect us. So not only are we the victims of police brutality, but then we're also the victims of a justice system that doesn't see us as human and don't even charge the police with any kind of criminal activity at all. They just get off because people see, and they see it from the police perspective, or the system of white supremacy protects them. And then finally, I want to close by saying, you and I have had this conversation before about why blacks seem to be, as far as on a whole, it's obviously, again, we're not a monolithic people, so we can't speak for the entire race. But the majority of blacks have not been out in the streets protesting, haven't put their, so to speak, their foot in the water of this push against Trump and this new uh, regime that he's creating. And we've always known, at least talking to the black folks I've talked to, that for one thing, we feel burnt out and tired. Secondly, we feel that we can't win this fight alone. Thirdly, we know that the minute we do get out there, because every protest you see now on the news, there's no police, there's no battering rams, there's no tear gas, there's no riot gear, there's none of that. Just people out there protesting, and they go home. Everybody goes home. No one's getting arrested, unless they're Palestinian students getting arrested on campuses across America. Other than that, no one else is getting arrested. And you saw this from this weekend, where the Newark mayor happened to go to an immigration facility, and again, being a black man, and there he is, he got arrested. So it just shows you right there that we know if we get involved, there's going to be different rules applied to us. We're going to be dealing with the uncertainty that we might not get to home. We might get arrested. We might get our heads busted. We might also get other charges. Who knows? So we know that Trump is just waiting for any excuse to deport a black person by saying that this person is a threat to democracy, a threat to America, and they have to be deported. It won't be a due process because they've already established a process that they don't have to follow due process. They can do what they want. And so, yeah, people will be here. We'll be protesting, and it get talked about on different news cycles until finally something else changes it, and then it'll get forgotten in the major news cycles. But it's family and friends are still how they try to keep it alive. So that's my initial. I know it's a long rant in there, but that's my initial take on why I feel that we don't have democracy now, and should we fight for it?
Yeah, I mean, well, our podcast is built on reciprocating long rants, so we're fine. So I want to just jump on how you began, because I think it's important to really. I'm going to just go a little bit deeper with one of the first things you said, and not that you need to hear it from me, but the more people I speak with and when I teach, the more aware I am. And I'm not a historian by any stretch of the imagination. I read a lot, and I want to be knowledgeable in history and developmental psychology and current events. So I read a lot. But just to talk about the idea of democracy in this country, specifically, but not only from the black perspective, and I'm not saying what I'm going to say next is from a black perspective. It's from an honest observer's perspective about what happened. So we have enslavement up till, and I'm going to put some dates in here too, because people think, well, once the slaves were free, everything was okay. So we have enslavement. The slaves were first freed by a proclamation from Lincoln in 1863, the exclamation, sure, the Emancipation Proclamation, which, because most people didn't have their phones on back then, that proclamation wasn't immediately known everywhere across the country. It took a while for the word to get out. But even once it got out, the slave owners in the South didn't say, okay, we have to let them go now. That didn't happen. So the Civil War ends in 1865 with a military victory. The United States wins a military victory over the Confederacy. And now the slaves are freed based on a military victory in 1865 and an amendment to the Constitution, which basically says that all of the slaves are free. 13th Amendment. That's also 1865. In 1868, the 14th Amendment was passed, guaranteeing everyone the right to due process, equal protection of the laws, and birthright citizenship is included in there too. From 1865 to 1877, for 12 years, there was something called Reconstruction in this country, where basically the United States troops occupied the South, occupied the Confederacy. And during that time, formerly enslaved peoples began to run for public office, build their own schools, build their own hospitals, and had success in that. They weren't immediately integrated into the white population, but they were beginning to get the freedom to do certain things. But then in 1877, Lincoln had been killed. earlier. And then in 1877, Andrew Johnson ends Reconstruction. He says, okay, we've made enough progress. So what the South then did was begin lynching or continue lynching formerly enslaved people. 6,000 lynchings between 1865 and 1950. Enact Jim Crow laws, Red Code laws, and basically terrorize formerly enslaved people, especially, but not only in the South, keeping them from even registering to vote. So there was not a democracy. And then I'm skipping certain things here. I'm going to fast forward now to the beginning in the 1950s, the beginning of the Civil Rights Movement, and the very necessity for a civil rights movement and the necessity for a 1964 Civil Rights Act and a 1965 Voting Rights Act. So some people will argue that America had never even been close to a democracy until 1965. And even then it wasn't perfect. And I'm just going to fast forward now. Same basic mentality as ending Reconstruction because we've made enough progress. Everything is okay in the South. First in 2010, in the Citizens United Supreme Court Justice decision, where they said that putting money into political elections was free speech, was protected by the First Amendment. So all this dark money went to different places. Nobody who was poor, whether they were white or black, benefited from that. Basically, wealthy people and corporations benefited from it. And then in 2013, in Shelby County versus Holder, the Supreme Court ruled to weaken the Voting Rights Act, and I forget the exact languaging of that, so I'm not going to try to replicate it, taking away the requirement that certain states who were the most egregious violators of voting rights back in the post-Reconstruction area through the 1960s no longer had to pre-report any changes in voting rights to the federal government for approval. They could just make changes and the government could sue them if they didn't like the changes. So immediately within 24 hours of that, beginning with Texas and then North Carolina and Georgia and other states, they began to make it harder for blacks to vote in those states. So to your point, for anybody who thinks, hey, Civil War, slavery was over, if you're black, you have nothing to complain about, you really need to learn history. And what I just gave was a very, very superficial version of that history. And I'll put a pin in it right there. So I'm just, again, I agree with what you put out there. And I think it's really important that if you're allowed to vote in this country, you should be required to be educated. And when I say educated, I don't mean a college degree, a master's degree, a PhD. Those are degrees. It's possible to go through, a baccalaureate degree, graduate degree, and postgraduate degrees and still be ignorant about a lot. You can be very educated just by reading and paying attention. And again, I'm not refuting some of the people I trust most are brilliant scholars and journalists who have advanced degrees. So I'm not in any way deprecating those degrees. I'm saying each of us is capable of learning on our own if it's important enough to us, so that when we do cast our vote and we do participate in the democracy, we're not just voting according to what some politician says or what some talking celebrity news commentator says. We have some basis in factuality. So that was my rant in support of yours.
Well, I appreciate that. And that's one of the reasons why I believe that, and this comes from any level, any color, any human being that studies history and allows themselves to be open-minded and allows themselves to be a critical thinker, you can have a conversation. You don't necessarily agree on every talking point, but you definitely can walk away knowing that you're going to actually communicate, which co-communicate, meaning that both two people talk and that you can actually intent on learning something from the conversation, as opposed to now where most people's conversations are designed to just teach. I'm going to tell you what
Mm.
you don't know, and their minds already made up. They're not learning anything new. They're just teaching you what you don't know.
Right.
Now, I agree with you 100% that, to me, and I'll take a little further when it comes to voting, that I think it should be test to vote, to be honest. I don't think it should be discriminatory, like it was in the past with the poll test and tax, where white folks is grandfathered in and only black folks that take it. But I do believe that people should have to take it to make sure they at least understand some basic constitutional laws. You understand the three parts of the government, just some basic things that folks need to understand in order to vote. Because now we've seen that votes can be influenced, votes can be purchased, which Elon Musk has tried to do and has successfully done. So we got to really look at that from a whole different perspective if we want to bring about change. And now, again, going back to a black man's perspective of democracy, I'll give another analogy about the Democratic Party, because it's not just really about Republicans either. I'll give another analogy about the Democratic Party and the Republican Party to try to bring home a message. And I shared a story about a war that happened during the biblical times. Let's say biblical times because it was, you know, back in the early BC uh, time frame. And one warring kingdom had defeated another warring kingdom. And on the defeated land, the warring kingdom locked all the folks who were prisoners. It built camps and put all the folks who lost the other kingdom in those prisons, these new makeshift prisons, and that's where we're going to live. So now there's four rich men who lived for the kingdom and lived at the kingdom who won, and they were able to kind of walk around and see that the people in the prison, the new kingdom lost, the prisoners for uh, this point of the story, were suffering.
Hmm.
So the first king said, the first rich man said, well, I've toured the prison and I realized the people don't have any water. They're suffering. They don't have any kind of water and any sewage. So I'm going to use my money to instill, build a well and get them good quality drinking water. So he used his money to do that. The second rich man toured the camp. He said, wow, I see the people don't have beds. They're sleeping on the ground. That's uncomfortable. That's wrong. So he said, I'm going to use my money. I'm going to buy all the prisoners beds. And I'm going to buy them sheets so they can sleep comfortably. Then the third rich man walked by and said, okay, well, they're sleeping comfortably and they have water. They don't have any food. So I want to buy them some food. I'm going to use my money to buy them, make sure they all have something to eat. So he uses money. It's now prisoners have water, they have sewage, they have, the water gets sent out so they can use toiletries and things of that nature, or use a toilet. They have food, and they have bedding. Then the fourth rich man walked by and said, wow, from what I see, the people are still suffering. So I'm going to use my money and bribe the guards and buy the key and let the prisoners out. So I use that analogy in that story to say that, to me, the Republican parties are obviously the ones that put the black folks in the prison. So you're going in prison. This is where you belong. And the Democratic Party are the three rich men who keep saying, well, we're going to help you. We're not going to stop your suffering, but we want you to suffer comfortably. But they never come with the key to let us out. It's always these laws that say, well, support my initiative. And what I would do is make sure a couple of you get hired in certain positions. I create some symbolic type of gestures, such as Juneteenth, well purpose that is. I'll give you a Supreme Court justice. I'll even put a black woman as my vice president. All these symbolic gestures that don't necessarily move the needle, doesn't change the condition of the people, but it looks nice. It feels good. And It's something folks can say, well, again, it's symbolic. I liken it to a pacifier for a baby. It's like white folks are given the real mother nurturing breast and receiving nutrients, and then we are given the actual pacifier. It looks and feels and almost tastes like a real mother's breast, but there's no nutrients coming from it. It's just something to keep you quiet, something to make you comfortable, something to bring you comfort. And that's how I feel this country is done with black people. Now, all this to say, what Trump and his administration definitely doing is destroying democracy for everyone. I agree with that 100%. We can see that. But by the same token, it's an environment that we're familiar with.
Hmm.
So that's the other part. It's not like it's alarming to us. It's not shocking to us. It's like, okay, well, this is what we've been talking about all along. And now folks get a chance to see that firsthand. Other folks now beginning to experience that firsthand. And I will say, and I want to conclude my second take on this, and then we'll get ready to go to break, is that I would say of all the marginalized groups, and I mean women, blacks, Native Americans, now immigrants, uh, Jewish individuals to a certain extent, two people, I would say, two of those marginalized groups would know the systems of white supremacy more than anybody, to the point where we're clear on it 100% of what it looks like and what has shown us the evilness, the destruction that it causes, and that's Native Americans and blacks. And I think that other folks now are experiencing how unjust it can be, how Trump can just sit there and literally lie, and everyone knows it's a lie. He can literally, like he was in an interview and brought up a photo of Garcia's hands and said it said MS-13, and everybody knows that it didn't even look like tattoos. It was clearly a photo, not even a good Photoshop image of a tattoo, just an illustration of what somebody thought those symbols on his knuckles meant. So they're saying MS-13 as a result of that. And Trump took it to mean, no, he has MS-13 and tripled down, not just doubled down, tripled down, became emphatic, wanted the interviewer to agree with him, and never came out and apologized, never said I was wrong on that. So when you see that kind of hypocritical, evil lying, what do you really expect when it comes to justice or fairness?
Hmm.
Well, before we go on our break, I'll give you a chance to respond, so you won't have to try to do too much remembering of
Yeah,
my points.
so just cut me off when it's time for the break. So first thing I want to make a quick comment on is the voting, the prospect of voting for testing. So I'm going to push back against that a little bit. So I completely agree that I would prefer that the American electorate, anybody who is old enough to vote in this country, and this I'm going to tie this in with, we just lost former Supreme Court Justice David Souter, died last week. And he's the one that has this beautiful statement about, not beautiful really, but this really stark statement about his greatest fear, what kept him up at night, was civic ignorance in the United States. People didn't know how the government worked. And someday somebody was going to come along and say, problems are so bad, only I can fix them, give me the power. Now Souter said that in 2012 before Trump was, on the radar screen. So he was just making a general statement that ended up coming true. But more to the point, I absolutely agree that I want the electorate to understand how the government works and understand civics, basically. But the testing piece is really, for me, a dicey thing, because it's possible that somebody who grew up poor, regardless of their skin pigmentation, somebody grows up poor in a poor school district where there's not funding, where the books aren't really available, can kind of get to voting age and not really have been taught well, but be a good person who cares about the dignity of other human beings. Because you don't need school for that if you have decent parents. And so what would scare me most was that if the tests were anything like the tests that were given to blacks during Jim Crow in post-Civil War, they would primarily keep people who were disenfranchised, even from an educational standpoint, since childhood, from passing the test. So that would be that's a dicey thing. So I agree with, we want an educated electorate, but the idea of having a test that was fair to everyone I think it's a really difficult thing to do, because the odds are it wouldn't disenfranchise any wealthy people of any skin pigmentation who had access to good education. It would only disenfranchise people who had less access, most of whom are in inner cities and in the South in this country. If you look at the independent ratings of states by quality of education, I mean, the worst ones are in the South. And even states with some big cities have pretty good education. New York, New Jersey, Connecticut doesn't have as many cities, but it has them. Massachusetts. So that scares me a little bit, but I agree with the idea that I want an educated voter for sure, who understands a bigger picture and not just got the information on who to vote for from their smartphone, social media, and some performance news celebrity who's getting paid millions of dollars a year. And I don't care if it's Rachel Maddow or Tucker Carlson. So anyway, that's my blurb on testing for voters.
All right. Well, I'll give you my feedback and my take on the other side of the break. So right now we're going to take a break for our sponsor, and then we'll circle back on our conversation.
Sounds good.
The playbook for growing a local business online is simple. Capture new leads, conversationally convert those leads into sales, turn those customers into positive reviews, and then reactivate those customers into repeat buyers. And that's exactly what our platform does. In order to consistently generate new leads, you first need to be found. The quickest way to get search engines like Google to put your business at the top of search results is by having a steady flow of positive reviews. With our platform, you can show up in search and stand apart from your local competition by easily collecting new customer reviews through text. But getting found is only the beginning. Most consumers choose the first business that responds to them. So unless you start conversations with potential customers almost instantly, they'll go somewhere else. That's why we make starting conversations with website visitors as easy as clicking a button, connecting you instantly through text message so the conversation doesn't end when they leave your website. And we bring all your leads, no matter where they come from, into a single conversation stream that supports text, email, video messaging, Google Business Chats, and even Facebook and Instagram DMs, so you can respond faster and more efficiently than ever. When it comes to turning all those conversations into customers, we make collecting payments just another convenient part of the combo, so you get paid faster no matter how they prefer to pay. Next, you'll want to turn your new customers into happy reviews, which is a snap with our new review request quick actions. The more conversations and customers you generate, the easier it becomes to drive repeat business. We make reactivating contacts into customers as easy as, yup, you guessed it, the push of a button. With bulk actions, you can send out text and email campaigns to generate new sales whenever you have a new update, promotion, or story to tell. We make modern online marketing simple. Let's start growing your business today.
And we're back. Thank you for that. Going back to our conversation, want to piggyback on some things real quick. Now, I think we can have another podcast. This is maybe where we disagree a little bit more concerning and I get your point about the access to education in the South. I think there's some ways around that. Again, not to say it is a solution, but it is a solution. But I do think allowing everyone just to vote because they're a citizen has its issues, but again, we have that in a different conversation that another show, because there's a lot to unpack in that alone. going back to the democracy issue, and we talked about, you and I would have several different marginalized groups to talk about democracy, give each person a perspective so that we can, again, our purpose behind the Fully Human Connections podcast is we see ourselves as fully human, or at least on a journey to become fully human, and we identify as that. And there's times you're going to have conversations with people who you may not necessarily agree with because of, as you talk about, your cultural givens, and what you've been exposed to, or what you allow yourself to kind of accept as well. What's interesting, I was talking to a guy on Zoom who I met, because Zoom is my number. I don't say Zoom, sorry. LinkedIn is my best place for meeting people from around the world and having great conversations. And I was talking to this gentleman, and I was sharing with him about my take on how this country puts us in the forced tribalization by saying that you're forced based on your race, your gender, your sexual orientation, your religion, your politics, that this is how you should behave, and these are the people who you have things in common with, and this is who you should spend your time with. He listened to that, and he came back and said, well, I just want to give you some pushback. I don't think we're forced. I think it's a choice. I think everybody chooses. And I said, okay, well, I can see where he's not hearing what I'm saying. And so we went back and forth a little bit until I could make my point to be clear that I'm saying that you're forced in the beginning based on your cultural givens. And then you grow and you have the ability to choose later on. And so we agreed from that point. Mm-hmm. And that was an important part of a conversation. It wasn't me trying to prove my point to him. I said what I said. He gave his feedback, and I listened to see what is he missing from what did I not can communicate clearly for him to come with that understanding or have that perspective about what I said. And that to me is where we need to be in today's conversations. I'm not seeing that from folks who are discussing it, again, from a context. I think as long as we're identifying things among the racial construct, black, white, then we're never going to see eye to eye. If I hop on this podcast with you and I say, oh, Reggie, he's white, and I just go by your skin pigmentation, and then you look at me and say, well, King, he's black. Right there, we have all the biases, all the, not necessarily maybe racist, but there's definitely biases there based on our cultural givens. Like, for example, if I never grew up around white people coming from St. Louis. St. Louis is a very segregated city. Maybe it's a little more integrated than it was when I was younger, but still one of the most segregated cities in the world. I mean, United States. And so I didn't have my first lunch with a white person until I was 22 in a working environment. And I finally actually had lunch with somebody who was white. Now, I saw white people. Let me make sure I'm clear. It's not that I didn't see white people. It's that we didn't interact. We didn't have lunch. We didn't break bread. We didn't communicate at all. We just went on our own. We just went our separate ways. So I had all these biases. I had all these thoughts. I could only go by what I saw on TV and what I read in books or what I've heard from other folks who told me what white people are. Mm-hmm. It wasn't until I began to have more lunches with more white people that I began to start to see that people are individuals. There's not this white people and then group everybody together. And that's what I hope that folks can get to the point where if we really want to bring change, because this is where I want to really tailor this conversation to, I think it's an excellent opportunity to really bring about justice and fairness now, not just get back to the status quo. Like, I'm not interested in getting out here protesting, sacrificing, just to get back to where we were. If we're going to do that, then we need to get to the point where we talk about equity and we talk about justice. When I look at that, meaning that one race does not have control over the land, the resources, nor the power. That can't be the case going forward, and then think we can have justice and equity. Now, I'm not saying that I want my race to have it. I'm saying that it shouldn't be judged about race at all. It should be based upon being fully human. And as human beings, then you identify as human beings, then we do what's just and we do what's right based on the humanity of that. And then I want to wrap up by saying this, 'cause I know we get near the top of the hour, that what I define as fully human, my perspective, I look at if we move away from race, because as long as we're in race, we're placing a structure rooted in competition. And I think as long as it's going to be a race construct, everybody who identifies as race is going to want their race to win, or their race to have the most resources, or definitely their race to have as much power as possible. So it's going to create competition, control, and it's going to be that survival mindset. It becomes a race against others. That's why we say human race, because now you're in competition with others, is what I look at. But when you identify as fully human, you step out of the race entirely. You're no longer confined by systems designed to divide. We're moved by connection, creation, and contribution. So it's within this framework, we're not just teaching business or branding. We're inviting people to share an identity that was given to them and their cultural givens and claim that one was born with them. This is what makes my philosophy, I believe, hopefully attractive to others, because we helping people remember their wholeness and what binds them to it. And this is where I hope that folks begin to see the benefit of becoming fully human and removing themselves from this race construct. Because, like I said, if I see myself as a fully human being, then by default, I see you as a fully human being. I don't see you as white man, right? I see you as a human being on the other side of this conversation, on the other side of this video monitor, and somebody who possibly I can learn something from, somebody who I can actually collaborate and we can co-create and do some things to make the world a better place.
Yeah, beautiful. So what I want to do is just agree with that and just reintroduce in 60 seconds or less, the developmental shorthand that we've been using for the last almost 3 years now, based on, over 50 years of longitudinal studies, where we can develop, not everybody develops at the same rate, and not everybody moves through these stages. And these are shorthand, but they capture it, from a perspective about, it's all about me. So it's a me-centric thing, which is important when you're a toddler. That's how you develop a sense of yourself. Every healthy toddler goes through that stage and drives their parents crazy. But then you graduate from it all about me, and it's all about us. And us can be typically the first one, if we're lucky, is our family of origin. Me and my family. Then it's me and my friends, my community, my schoolmates, my sports teams, and my political parties, my nation, my ethnicity. And those can be healthy or unhealthy. If I'm healthy with my us or my groups, it's us and them. Oh, look, another group. Something different about them. Let's get to know them and we can learn from each other. That's great. Unhealthy is us versus them. There's another group. We should be scared of them. Let's hurt them or ignore them or whatever. The third step is it's about all of us. That's a human-centric view. And that's the one you were talking about. This view that if I'm really striving to be fully human, when I see another human being, I'm automatically, or at least if I do a little bit of effort, I have empathy that that person is just like me. Not in terms of everything I believe or think or my skill set or anything, but that's another person in this species. And it's harder to hurt another person when you have that sense of we're in the same species. And the last one, which almost nobody develops into, is it's about all of the universe, creation, where you care as much about oak trees and earthworms as you do about everything. So that's really important to remember. And it's a developmental trajectory. We're basically educated from me through us, and the vast majority of people who will listen to this and who we know don't get to the all of us perspective. The vast majority of the people on the planet live in a group-centric perspective. Some of them are healthy. Some of them are not healthy. Some of them are us and them. Let's get along. Some of them are us against them. Let's hurt them or ignore them. But very few people really live in it's about all of us. So to your point, which is a beautiful way to express it, fully human means when I see another human being, I don't see Italian or black or white or Irish or gay or straight or trans. I see another human being, and I interact based on that empathic connection. So that's me complicating what you said and trying to support it.
No, I appreciate it. I appreciate you talk about developmental perspective because I call it forced tribalization.
Yeah.
You say group centric, and this country is definitely wants to put us in groups. Now, one of the things that I would say as well, because again, this is the system engineer in me, and that's why I talk about choosing your spiritual energy level. If you go around hating people, there's no value in that intrinsically for your own health, for your own mental, well-being. Because, for example, and I don't, but I'm just using this as an example to be clear. If I said I hated gay people, then every time I saw a gay person, they would just destroy my state. I could be in a good state, but it's a gay man. Oh God, my God, can't stand them, right? And then I go through whatever evil biases is running through my mind, and then this person leaves my sight. Then I'm back. Maybe it'll take me an hour to get back to a positive state. I'm happy. I'm enjoying life. It's sunny. And I see another gay person. And I go through that same thoughts. And it's like you realize that you're no longer in control. And that's the point I think a lot of people don't understand when they buy into the bigotry and the hate. I get the fact that, and I think we all by human default are prejudiced, which means to prejudge. If you don't know someone, you don't know anything about a person's background, and you only been exposed to it by books, stories, or movies, or hearsay, then you're going to have some prejudice bias. But if you're growth minded and you sit down and have a conversation with somebody, then you can learn from that person, and you can realize, oh, I was wrong about that. That wasn't true. I see it now, the error of my ways. And that's where I'm going with this. And that to me is when you get to that's the benefit I see of being fully human, is that I don't walk around with any hatred of anybody. I think that I see value in any person as long as they're alive and they're not hating anyone. Now I can dislike some people and I hate their behaviors. So I believe that you don't judge the person, you judge their behaviors, because the behaviors can change. And I think a lot of people are victims of their cultural givens and they're victims of social media. But if you allow yourself to continue to be a victim of that, knowing that if you get your news only from one perspective, that you're going to be biased. MSNBC, they have an agenda. At the end of the day, it's a corporation. It's not just really designed to just give you news for your betterment. It's designed to give you a perspective, an agenda. CNN, any news organization, Fox, definitely Fox. We see it more with Fox because Fox is blatant with their lies, and it's clear what their agenda is, which is to create fear and keep everybody believing there's a boogeyman out there while they execute their agenda. But I'll close by saying this, then we get ready to walk into our final thoughts and your suggestions as far as how we can move forth. My prayer is that people get so fed up with the garbage that's out there right now and seek for peace of mind. And peace of mind will only come through understanding who you are and seeing yourself as a fully human individual.
Amen. So moving forward, I mean, the suggestion that I would put out there is, and again, most of my suggestions are, on self-reflection and require, honesty with the self and truthfulness. Is when, I'll just say it in first person, it's easier, is when I interact with another human being, especially a stranger, somebody I already know. It's a little bit, I would hope that this wouldn't be as important, but it still would be important, just not as, I would have done that work already. But when I interact with a stranger, with whom am I really interacting? Am I interacting with their physical size, with whether they're a man or a woman, with whether they, whatever their skin pigmentation is, if they have an accent compared to mine, if I know something about them already, if I know something about their political orientation? Am I interacting with all of those traits, or am I interacting with the human being? So is it a me-centric or group-centric interaction where I'm putting that person in categories based on appearance and what they say? Or am I able to interact on a human-centric, to recognize this person, even with all our apparent differences, is a member of the same species? And again, as you said earlier, that doesn't mean I'm going to agree with the person or even like them. It's a matter of recognizing their humanness. And once I do that, it's easier to be in good faith conversation and make more honest and well-informed choices within my interactions with that person. So really tune into how I see this other human being.
Absolutely. Thank you for sharing that. As we begin to wrap our show up, we always like to end it with giving examples of people who we believe are fully human and who have demonstrated throughout the years, maybe people who have passed on and people who still may be with us right now, who are fully human, that we want to give love to, give flowers to, and give an example of how someone can live this type of way, and it's not just some hypothetical concept that we're just throwing out there. So with that being said, I want to, again, and one other thing I want to put this qualifier out there for it as well, to say that doesn't mean when I lift up a person, or when you lift up a person, doesn't mean they were perfect. They didn't make any mistakes.
We wouldn't have anybody to lift up if we did that.
Exactly. So I don't want folks to say, well, this person did that, so how can you say they're fully human? I'm saying their legacy, their actions, that they're had more of an impact, were fully human. So person I want to name right now is a gentleman by the name of Jim Rouse. And Jim Rouse was a developer who developed this area that, which I believe was a great city in Maryland called Columbia, Maryland. Mm-hmm. And Columbia, Maryland was he built Columbia, Maryland like in the 50s. And Columbia, Maryland was one of the first cities in America that was built primarily to be one where mixed couples can live and grow and thrive. And he built a great city where he allowed blacks, whites, males, female, straight, gay, it didn't matter. He let folks move into this community and build a community. And right now, Columbia is one of the most thriving communities in Maryland. It makes Maryland a great city to live in. And when you have developers who build walkable parks, which he did, it's a walkable city, a lot of places to walk, a lot of places to parks, just really a great city overall. And even within how it's run and how it's structured today, it's clean. You even see the areas where it's lower income individuals, and that's still cleaner than it is in most lower income areas. So I just really want to quickly tip my hat to Jim Rouse. Again, I know he wasn't perfect. I know folks can probably find flaws and try to push back. But to me, if you drive through Columbia, if you know anything about Columbia, you can see where his legacy, his impact was felt. He made a difference. And I think it's a model that could be used where blacks and whites can live among not only blacks and whites, but it has a strong Asian population, Jewish population, Indian immigrants, everyone living in Columbia, and everyone's pretty much getting along well for the most part as human beings can be. And I think it could be a model that could be used across the country. So I want to lift up Jim Rouse from that perspective.
Yeah, beautiful. Just really quickly, how do you spell his last name?
R-A-U-S.
R-A-U. Okay, good. Great. Thank you. Yeah, so I'm going to compliment Jim Rouse with Timothy Snyder, who's a historian and who has, most recently has written a book entitled On Freedom. And prior to that, he had a smaller volume entitled On Tyranny. And then a series, he has many books out, but he's considered the top scholar in North America on European history. So his research and his earlier books were on I think in 2010, the book called Bloodlands, between Stalin and Hitler, about what really happened and how many millions of people were killed under the auspices of those two men. And then Black Earth, the Holocaust as History and Warning. I think that came out in 2016. And what he's been doing recently since Trump, since the first Trump election, is tying in his knowledge of European history with what he sees happening in the United States right now from a totalitarian or tyrannical or autocratic or oligarchic perspective. And he has jokingly said that, he thought at a certain point in his life he was going to relax a little bit, go on some vacations with his wife, who's also a scholar, and they have two kids who are in their teens. But after the Trump election, his books became more popular. People wanted him to come and speak more. And he began to get more and more involved in, I'd say, some level of activism, as well as presenting his books in talks and all. And he's he's brilliant. And he's also humble in many ways. He won't get trampled by anybody intellectually. Like if anybody's out of line, he'll put them in their place. But he's this kind of gentle soul with this brilliant body of knowledge and intellect. And he's the primary person that I'm reading right now and listening to, because he has a lot of his talks are up on YouTube, so you can actually listen to a world-class scholar speaking about current events through the lens of primary research in history. So Tim Snyder is just this week my exemplar for being fully human. He'd be the first to admit that he's not, I think. But I find him to be really quite wonderful.
Well, again, as we said before, thank you for sharing that, by the way. And what's his name again?
Timothy Snyder, Snyder.
Okay.
He's been at Yale for years, but he's actually this year he's been up in the University of Toronto on a leave, which had nothing to do with the universities being troubled down. He had been planning on going to Toronto for a year with his wife and family for some time now. It just happened to look like he was escaping to Canada from the US, but that's not what he did.
Yeah. Oh, okay. Well, thank you for sharing that.
Yeah.
And I was mistaken. I want to correct this before we wrap up. Jim Rouse, his full name was James Rouse.
Okay.
And Rouse is spelled Rouse.
Okay.
Like mouse without the
Got it.
R. And so I just want to make that correction as we wrap up.
Yep.
So again, Reggie, thank you again for being present, for being a person who is fully human. And more importantly, you always bring positive energy no matter what's going on in your life. I don't have you ever get on a phone call and complain for the first 10 minutes, which is why it's important to be a 10 when we start these conversations off. So, even though we're dealing with things in our lives, we're able to compartmentalize those and focus on what's positive and what's important in the moment. Okay. Listening audience, I want to thank you all for listening to another episode of Fully Human Connections. I look forward to next Wednesday at 10 a.m., which we will begin our next conversation. If anyone's listening and want to join our conversation and have a perspective, if you're open to be growth-minded, you don't necessarily agree with Reggie and I, but if you have something to share, by all means, we encourage you to click on the link, let us know, and we might invite you on a call or on the podcast. Thank you. Until next Wednesday at 10 a.m., let's all continue to work toward being more fully human.
Amen.